Hello and welcome to part 2 of my MGB maintenance videos. I've got my trusty MGB driver's handbook, and this time we're going to be looking at the 3,000 mile inspection slash service, which is column C in that table from part 1. For anybody who hasn't seen part 1, I'll put a little link up now to have a look at that, and you'll notice that in that table column C, which is the 3,000 mile check, incorporates everything from the weekly check plus some extras. So I'm not going to go over the same stuff I did in part 1. I'm just going to do the stuff that's extra for the 3,000 mile check. But if you're going to do it every 3,000 miles, then you do the stuff I did in part 1 and the stuff I'm going to show you today. For those of you who did see part 1, you'll know that I said that my dad was in hospital at the time with coronavirus or COVID-19. Thank you to everybody who sort of sent get well messages and that kind of stuff. He is out of hospital now and he's at home recovering well, so thank you very much for all your kind words. It means a lot, so thank you. So looking in my book in column C, the first place to start I think is under the bonnet to check the brake and clutch fluid. So let's go and have a look. So here we are back in the engine bay of my MGB, and you'll see sort of a tangled mess of wires on this side of the engine, which is why we have all the electronics and that kind of stuff. But we also have these two reservoirs. Now mine are really rusty, and you can see actually down by the side of them there's rust down there as well, and this is normally because the fluid that goes in these reservoirs is quite corrosive to paint, so probably been overfilled and spilled at various points during its life. And what we have to do is actually make sure that these two reservoirs have enough fluid in them. So this one here is for the brakes, and this one here is for the clutch. And the reason I know this is because the two pipes coming off them, one, if you follow it down, goes to this kind of valve here, and that's where the brakes kind of split off for the front and rear brakes. But even easier than that to tell which way around these are is because they follow the order of the pedals. So this is the throttle cable here for the accelerator pedal on that side, brake pedal is in the middle, and the clutch pedal is furthest towards the passenger side. So that's how you know which way they are. So to top them up, easy, just undo these tops if you use the right hand. That's my left hand, so a bit weak. There you go. And you can see that, well, I'm not sure if you better see it, it's right near the top here. I recently filled them up, well, it was actually a couple of months ago, there. But my clutch one was actually a bit low before. Oh gosh, it's stiff. Right. This is where going to the gym would probably help. Well, that was harder than it needed to be. I need to use an adjustable spanner to get this off in the end, but mole groups probably would just work just as well. I'll try not to tighten it up too much next time. And in here, this reservoir is actually, probably can't see it in the dark, but it's actually below where it should be. So it's supposed to be half an inch, at least half an inch below the filler neck here, or 13 millimeters, I think it states in the book. Just simply because it needs to be full, and it's dropped slightly. And if you've seen any of my other videos, you might have seen one where my clutch was a bit dodgy and I had to top that up. So it's indicative of a leak there. So we'd need to have a look and see where that's coming from. And actually, that's one of the checks in the book, is to if you are topping up your brake and clutch fluid regularly, is to check the lines for leaks. So essentially just following that copper pipe to where it goes and just making sure there's no leaks anywhere. But for that, you'll have to jack the car up. And same for the brakes. So you follow the copper pipe down into each sort of wheel well, and actually the rear brakes go to a central place near the back before they split off for each side. So we could have a look at that and see what we can see. I would top up the fluid reservoir now, but I haven't actually got my brake fluid come yet. I've ordered lots of parts to do this series, but with sort of high priority deliveries for food and that kind of thing being put first, it's understandable that these parts might take a while to arrive. So that's why I'm mixing up some of these videos with other videos that I can make in the in between time, just so I'm putting out one a week or one every 2 weeks. So we'll have a look at that in a bit, but the next thing to check under the bonnet is the drive belt, and that's just down here, and it's this bit of rubber here. So I don't know if you can kind of see from the side. It's a bit tricky to see. You might be able to see it from the top. So here we have the alternator here, and my car's a bit strange because it's a Mark 1, so you've got this funky bracket here holding the alternator on, because there would have been a dynamo there originally, being a positive earth car, but now it's a negative earth converted with an alternator, and that's one of the things that the drive belt attaches to. And then we've got the water pump pulley there, and then further down we've got the main sort of crank pulley. So only 3, and what we're looking for is whether the drive belt is first of all cracked at all, which it isn't because it's relatively new, and also whether it's worn away at the edges. So if you see the thickness of the belt against the sort of thickness of where it sits in the pulley, if it's not quite filling that space, then it indicates that the drive belt's kind of narrowed slightly and worn away. And what can hasten this wear is if your pulleys aren't lined up properly, and that's especially true with the alternator. So if the alternator's shifted on its bracket, or it's not done up quite right, then it could be out of line, and being out of line means that you're going to sort of wear the edges of the belt more quickly. So if you are going to replace the belt or adjust its tension, so tension, this feels about right. If you give it moderate pressure, it should only deflect about, well, I think it's about half an inch, quarter of an inch, something like that. Let's have a quick look in the book. Yeah, so it says it here. Fan belt tension, yeah, 12 millimeters, so half an inch under moderate hand pressure. So that's under halfway of the longest part of the belt, which is actually probably under the alternator, but yeah, it seems about right. You just don't want it to be too tight, and you don't want it to be slack so it slips, essentially. You kind of get a feel for that kind of thing. But if we were gonna tighten it, you'd slacken off some of these alternator bracket mounts here, so these ones, this one, and there's another sort of sliding one underneath. You might be able to see it just through this gap, and you undo that, so undo all those bolts, and then this alternator is free to sort of slide, and you slide it down to get the belt off, and then you lever it up to get the tension on it, and then you have to quickly tighten up all of the bolts and things. And the way they say to do it in the book is to get like a block of wood and put it down against the alternator bracket and lever it. So it seems a bit sort of brute strength kind of way to do it, whereas modern cars normally have like a nut that you tighten or loosen to get the appropriate pressure, but for this it's very much a brute force kind of approach, very manual. But there's only 3 pulleys, so actually replacing the drive belt is really easy. We won't do it today because I don't need to, but I might make another video on that when it's time to do it. One thing I didn't say about the fluid that goes in the clutch and brake reservoirs is just regular DOT4. So I think DOT3 was the original specification, but DOT4 is kind of the improved version of that. And I think you can actually mix them if you've got DOT3 in there. But I'm likely to actually renew all of the fluid in the brake system and the clutch system. Actually, I want to get all fresh stuff in there. What you shouldn't do though is put DOT 5.0, because that's made of sort of a silicon-based stuff and doesn't mix with the sort of ethanol glycol type mix, which is in the DOT 3 and 4 and 5.1. DOT 4 is fine. That's kind of ordinary brake fluid that you'd put in there. So over time, those ones are called, the fluid is called hygroscopic fluid, so it absorbs water after a while, and that reduces the effectiveness of the brake fluid and can cause it to boil in the lines and cause air to form, and that kind of gives you a sort of longer pedal travel and your brakes go all spongy, which mine do feel like they're doing, but that could be either the brake fluid or it could even be the rear brakes. So that's something else that we need to check in a minute. So this is going to be a bit harder to see. While we're at the front of the car, it's worth looking at the steering gaiters. which are these things here, and this is one of the things to check, and that's checking for the overall condition of it and whether there are any splits in there, any oil leaks. Now it does look oily, you can see it's all over my hand, but if you remember, I had a catastrophic oil leak a little while ago, which means all of this is covered in oil, and I'm not sure whether this is because of steering leak or if it's from my oil leak I had a while ago. So I mean, the actual rubber's look in reasonably good condition, so I don't think the rubbers are split. I think this is part of the oil leak that I had, because you can see up here that everything's covered in it, and over that side it's looking pretty dry, and I think these were probably changed at the same time. If we move over there, and these gaiters all feel supple and not cracked or anything, so I think they're all right. But that's another reason why you should always get classic cars MOT'd, because this is the kind of thing that the garage have to inspect, and they're more likely to pick up a fault than you are. So when it comes to sort of safety stuff, it's best to leave it to the professionals, really. But on first inspection, I don't think there's anything to worry about steering joint wise there. I think that's fine. Okay, so just jacking the car up now, or I have jacked it up. I'm doing this front wheel to have a little look at the brake lines behind it. So let's just pop this down here. And you should be able to see here the brake line coming up and then feeding into this tube, which is my brake line, and then that comes all the way here to the caliper. And this, apart from being covered in cobwebs and a little bit of surface corrosion, looks in fairly good condition. There's no sort of hint of wetness or leakage there, so that's fine. I mean, I would love to get some sort of braided lines on there, but the problem with braided lines is that, you know, they look fancy and they increase your sort of pedal feel and things. You can't actually see the condition of the hose beneath them, and that's why I think in racing, if you use braided lines, you're required to change them fairly regularly, because for that reason you don't know what's happening to the rubber underneath. So for sort of safety's sake, if you're not planning on replacing your braided lines really often, it's almost better to stick with the rubber hose, and at least then you can see the condition of your brake system a bit more clearly. But yeah, in terms of inspecting them for leaks and things, these look okay, and actually gives a quite good view of the MGB suspension. You can see the spring in here, the lever arm damper on the top, and this is an uprated one. I think the guy who had it before me put on the maybe the V8 versions, maybe they were slightly stiffer, I don't know, to accommodate different engine, but they're supposed to be uprated. And a long time ago, I think the person who had it before me decided to paint the calipers and the drums actually red. I don't really like that look too much. I prefer to have sort of a silver or black, but it keeps corrosion at bay, or maybe it did to start with, but now it's seen better days. And you can also see my my discs in here, my grooved and slotted discs, which is something I fitted a couple of years ago. But yeah, that's all there is to see in here. Right, so now we're at the back of the car, and you can see my drum brake. So again, it's been given some red paint treatment at some point, which is again not my kind of thing, but I guess it helps pick out the different parts. And you can see here my leaf spring there. And what's different about my car compared to some other ones is that the traditional sort of lever arm damper has been replaced with a more modern shock absorber here. So this is actually some more modern make than what would have been there originally, and just helps give the ride at the back a bit more of a smoother ride rather than the lever arms that are there to start with. So what we're actually looking at the back here is really just to prove a point. You don't need to do this for this particular part of the check, but it's essentially to adjust your rear brakes and your handbrake. So this is a drum, like I mentioned, and inside here you've got a couple of shoes, and to cause the car to stop, the shoes have to move sort of out to make contact with the inside part of the drum. So this all happens inside here. The shoes get pushed out and scrape against the outside, which is what slows you down. And the further away the shoe is from the outside of the drum, the more your pedal will have to travel to be able to push it outwards, and also the more you have to pull your handbrake up to get it to take effect. So what we're going to be doing is that there's a little thing on the back of the drum here, a little twisty thing, and we're going to be turning that to the point where the wheel won't move anymore, and that's basically that's where the brake's going to be on, and then we'll have to back it off until the wheel becomes free again. So what we're doing is we're making sure that there's the minimum amount of distance between the shoe and the drum whilst the brake is off. So for this we'll have to take the handbrake off and put the wheel back on to give us a bit of leverage to be able to either check whether the wheel's stopped or not. So yeah, I'll do that now, and have to make sure the wheels are chocked and everything, so I don't want this car sort of rolling off its jack stands. So actually putting the wheel on, it's quite hard to see what you're doing. So I've taken the wheel off and pretty much show the same sort of thing. So what I've done is you see this little nubbin here. It's like a square peg sort of thing, and this is what brings the shoes in and out from the drum. So I just used an adjustable spanner just to get on that and turn it. And I've turned it now so that the drum brake is very stiff to turn. So I know that those shoes are making contact with the outside of the drum there. Now, if I get my adjustable spanner back on this thing, this is why having the wheel off is quite handy, because you can see a bit better what you're doing. Okay. And it's making sure that we're turning it the right way. So that's easier to turn now. So I just need to turn it until it spins freely, and then I know that it's in the right position. Then repeat for the other side. So that's freely spinning now, but if you wiggle it, I don't know if that's normal. That feels like a sloppy diff to me, and I thought I did have that anyway. It could just be the gears moving about, but it sounds a bit clunky, sloppy to me, so that might be something that needs to be looked into in the future, something for another day. Okay, so just to finish adjusting this side of the car, and what's interesting about this side is that you can see the handbrake cable coming through here, but also the brake cable, which is this one, this flexible hose here, where it meets the sort of a T-junction, then goes off to each side. So that's another place to look for any leaks and wetness. And actually, if you get braided brakes, then you normally get a pack of 3, one for each of the front wheels, and then the replacement for this flexible hose here. So if you wonder why there's 3 rather than 4, that's why there's only one flexible hose at the back before it goes into these copper ones that go to each drum brake. So that's that done. It's time to put the wheel back on and do the last couple of jobs. Right, so we're down to our last few checks now, and in the book it advises that you check the condition of all of your electrical equipment. So essentially the safety stuff. So what we did in part 1 was that we checked our screen washers, but it also says to check to make sure your wipers are working, the condition of your wiper blades as well. And you can do that just by using your washers and making sure the wipers actually clear the water that's gone onto the screen. It also advises that you check your lights, so turn them on, have a look to make sure your lights come on, your full beams and your indicators and that kind of stuff. One thing which is quite tricky to test with one person, that's your brake lights. So if you're parked by a wall at night time, you can kind of put your foot on the brake and you can see if the wall behind you gets illuminated. But with today's modern technology, it is slightly easier than that. You just balance your phone up behind the car, put the video on, get in the car, press your brake pedal, and you'll be able to see straight away if either of your brake lights are working or not. One thing to note in the earlier cars like mine is that I don't have hazard warning lights in here, neither do I have reversing lamps or a fog lamp, so it's kind of less to check on my one, but certainly later models, if you've got a fog lamp or hazard lights or reversing lights, then just make sure all of those are working. And then I think in the book it says to check for an exhaust leak. That's kind of tricky for me at the moment because the battery's flat in my car and I can't get it cranked over. So I mean, it's pretty obvious. I mean, if you turn on your car and you hear sort of a racket coming from the exhaust, like gas escaping, then that's indicative of an exhaust leak. And then the final one in the book is at the back of the car, and that's to check your fuel filler. Now I think this is a bit of an easy one, even without looking down here, because if you had a fuel leak inside the car, then you're going to smell that. I think potentially for roadster owners it'll be less obvious if it's in their boot, but certainly in the GT this is basically in the cabin. And I don't know if on later cars it's not metal here and it's like a flexible hose, but for the earlier cars it's a big metal tube with like a rubber attachment to the top of the fuel tank, which is just down here. And if you had a fuel leak here, you would definitely know about it. It'd stink. But mine is dry and there's no fuel smell, so I think we're good. So I think that concludes the 3,000 mile check. I mean, this is only the second one of the series, and it's already quite apparent to me that as owners we're expected to do an awful lot more than just check our oil every now and again. It seems like it's a lot more involved than that. There are a couple other things that are in the book that I didn't do. So one is to adjust your headlight level and that kind of stuff. But there's a little asterisk next to it in the book, which denotes that you should let your dealer or mechanic do it. I mean, I don't know how to adjust headlights. I think you need to be in front of like a wall or have some sort of measuring equipment, which I don't have here on my drive, and I can't drive anywhere because of the lockdown. But certainly that's probably best left to a mechanic. And actually that's one thing to say for all of this stuff, is if you're not confident in doing it, then get a mechanic to do it, because a lot of this stuff is to do with safety. So for example, adjusting the brakes and things, I'm reasonably confident in what I'm doing. Same with jacking up the car and that kind of stuff. If you're not confident in doing it, then please don't. It's your safety that's at risk, so only sort of follow it if you think that you know that you're capable of doing this. And this is just a guide. This isn't exactly sort of gospel. This is just how I'm reading it out of the book. So there could be better ways of doing it, and a mechanic is the sort of surefire way to get these jobs done properly. But if you're a cheapskate like me, then by all means give it a go yourself. Anyway, this is the second part. Third part might take a little while longer because it's a sort of 6-month service, so there's a lot more to do in that one. But yeah, I hope to bring that to you soon, as long as my parts arrive and I get enough time to do that. But yeah, until the next time, see you later. Bye.